Testing, testing. All right. Today's video is each of us is fulfilling a prophecy. Interesting. And I write a note under it. Something like this makes life call upon us. Our job is to find the truth, the true understanding of ourselves. All right. So each of us is fulfilling a prophecy, right? Something like this makes life call upon us. That's basically I'm pointing. Notice here, I'm pointing. Like this is my note. Like something like this makes life call upon us, not us basically be like the wanderers. I don't want to say it gives us purpose. And then I say our job is to find the true understanding of ourselves. Yesterday I was having a conversation because over the past 2 months I was writing in my book and I got to writing something super interesting, which at our core there is nothing. And so even the self, which I consider the engine that translates our expression into this world, because there's the self and then there's the ego. And the reason I'm saying that is because like our job is to find the true understanding of ourselves. And I don't know if I want to approach it like engineers would, but effectively, anytime we're having a thought and we're self-reflecting on it, what we're doing is we're destructuring a process. We're kind of like dismantling what's going on and we're processing things in a way that allows us to understand where they're coming from, which is very much how engineers work, right? Because they go like, okay, so if I want to make the car move, or how is the car moving? If I want to make a car move, I need to move the wheels. And to move the wheels, I need something connected to the wheels, and then I need an engine that turns them around. And how would I connect that to the engine, right? Like that thought process. And so my current view of the self is kind of like the engine that allows us to express, which is also, in a way, a fabrication. It's something I fabricate based on the experiences I have within this realm, which is basically like, you want to call it the realm of the living. And so I believe at the core, like if you take a step behind the self, there's I exist, I, right? I, the infamous I. I exist behind the self. And I is basically the thing that translates, and the self is basically what translates my intention to reality, which in turn basically like translates my reality into the form of the expression that is transferred through my ego to the real world. And any way you look at it, this I exists within consciousness itself. I feel I is the connection to consciousness. That's why, like when it comes to the chakras, right? Like the last one is basically the crown chakra that connects you to like the universe. I feel that's where I resides. It's basically like this, well, even the seventh layer of consciousness is basically like there's God consciousness and then there's unity consciousness. And unity consciousness, God consciousness is when you realize everything is going through you, and unity consciousness is when you realize everything is one, it's unified, it's just one. And all these layers of consciousness, there are seven of them as well, by the way, or according to writing in scriptures. That those are the things that make sense. Within these seven layers of consciousness, what happens is basically the consciousness itself created itself through realizing its own existence. And its existence is basically It existed from nothingness. So in a way, we have created this translational effect. Consciousness rippled in order to create this experience, which is life, man, what we're doing right now. To that point, if we are if we are literally an expression of consciousness, yet we have the power to basically, and I remember having this conversation with somebody. He was like, there's no point of our existence because at one point I just like we were debating free choice, and he was like, at one point he decided to let everything go because there's no free choice. And I was like, who chose to let everything go? And he looked at me and he goes like, we were debating free will, sorry. And instantly had that look on his face where he kind of like dove into like the abyss. You're like, ultimately, uh, letting go is basically a decision that kind of like relieves you of every other decision you make. And so, beautifully said from me, naturally. I was proud of myself at that moment. But it's because like we consciously are translating everything from a certain point where we identified ourselves as alive. Even though I believe we are life, we are an extension of life, we are the evolution of life, and it's just like evolving in different ways. So it's the same view of life where you kind of like, what's my purpose? Or you're kind of like questioning doubts. And the best you could do is be like, if I am fulfilling my a prophecy, that means every thought that comes to my mind, I get to decide whether I want to naturally, right? Like there are thoughts that are crazy, but the only reason they're there is because they're kind of like telling you something. And there are thoughts that are like, hey man, I've been around for a while. Like, why don't you just do this so I can get out of your head? And then different thoughts come. And it feels like what we're doing is we're stacking these thoughts, or we're building our life based on these thoughts. And where are they coming from? If not basically like inspired by the cosmic energy that kind of exists within us, right? Because like when your mind is all over the place, it's all this energy that has nowhere to go. And when your mind is calm, it's basically like energy that's spread and encompasses everything. Because like when you're calm, everything that happens around the world basically is grabbed by you. And when you're not calm, you're like tunnel vision focused when you're like fully energetic, excited, or whatever. So if the universe speaks to us through this energy, then in a way, we're not really getting ideas, or we're not really clever. We're just basically following the universe's lead. And so our life is lived based on a vision. The more we kind of like approach it, the clearer it becomes. And as we move forward towards it, it basically expresses itself differently. And then when it happens, then it's a prophecy. Whether it's falling in love and wanting to get married, whether it's building a dream company, whether it's changing your community, ruling the world, finding your career. All of these, what we call we manifested them. The truth is they were prophesized. What we did was we allowed them to kind of like, we allowed ourselves to accept that it wasn't really us that were in control. Because are we ever, right? And it really comes to like the fact that our entire existence is based on absorbing and processing. You cannot turn off your ears. You cannot turn off your eyes. cannot turn off your senses, right? You cannot turn off your sense of smell and you cannot turn off your sense of taste, which means the essence of how we live is absorbing. And the only thing we're in charge of is processing. And effectively, what we do through the ego is basically become very opinionated about the processes. When the global constant, the universal constant, is change itself. And the one thing that the ego fears, which is basically the direct representation of your mind, is change. So we are fulfilling a prophecy, each one of us. And anytime you accomplish something, it's a prophecy fulfilled. So why not the grander ambitions? Why not the bigger visions that you have flowing through your head? Why not accept that? Because once you look at yourself as like a tool, then ultimately it's the size of your vision that basically declares what kind of like presence you have in this world. I'm getting a bit emotional about my prophecy. I love you guys. It's a video.